Let me welcome up a woman who literally needs no introduction. To kick off today's conversation that will encapsulate the essence of this great moment in this great city, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Jackie Reeses, the CEO and co-founder of Lead Bank. Her company is number 15 on the CNBC Disruptor 50 list. She's not only a proud Wharton alumna from the class of 1992, she's also a board member and this year's forum chair, but a truly remarkable leader who has shaped industries and empowered so many others to lead boldly. Please join me in welcoming Jackie to the stage.
Hello. Hello. I wish my kids were here to hear that.
I can send them the note.
Please do.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. I do really, it takes a lot of effort to host a forum of this size and this importance, and you have just been remarkable in sharing your perspective, your ideas for making this a great experience. I want to publicly acknowledge how important you've been to this.
Well, San Francisco is a great place to do it.
Yes, it is.
It's an amazing city.
Yes, it is. So let's talk about San Francisco. It has long been a city, a laboratory of sorts, an environment where experimentation, innovation, creativity has driven everything that's here. You're a longtime resident of San Francisco. What should we know about what differentiates this place from anywhere else?
I think one of the most amazing things, and this is so relevant for Wharton people because we're so trained towards success, is that this is the best place for pivot culture. And by that, everybody can fail, and it's a point of pride. Like Tuesday afternoon at the grocery store, whoever you see is pivoting. It wasn't a failure. And I think that mentality is incredible, and frankly, the New Yorkers could learn something by it. Because it's an incredible way to think about failure as a learning experience as opposed to failure as a setback. And so I think it's one of the most remarkable things about the culture of San Francisco. And then you heard Vinod comment on it last night, but the ecosystem here is incredible. And I think it's really valuable to think about a city as a culture and finding employee types. And that's incredibly powerful when you're trying to start companies. You can find ecosystems across the United States and in a place like San Francisco where you start to build a culture of employees and you find groups of employees who you think you could build your company with. And so this is an amazing place to start AI companies, fintech, all kinds of tech companies, because the culture is just used to this kind of startup dynamic in a way that no other city is across the country.
So what could a New York, for example, learn from San Francisco? How would we create that kind of dynamism and that kind of pivot culture someplace else?
You know, I think you need to draw upon groups of individuals, and it's really about expertise and training. I think Wharton is a great place for that. Like the engineering school in Wharton, it draws a great population of certain types of people. Same with the healthcare system at Penn. But I think New York, thankfully, has started to build engineering schools and business schools that are of higher caliber than they were in the past. And that just draws a young, dynamic, first principles type of thinking that a lot of cities could use in order to kind of augment the foundational workers of a city. I think it makes all the difference in the world by culture.
So you mentioned your children when you sat down, and I know at least two of your children. I'll have the opportunity to meet the third one soon. What are you seeing in this generation of young people that might also be contributing to this pivot culture, this new sense of dynamism and innovation and creativity? Is there?
Yeah, I do find it interesting that work is now almost like a tour of duty, and there's no longer this lifeline of like long careers and a steadiness in one company. And I think there's a lot to learn at lots of different companies and exposure to lots of different things. And I think this generation is more attuned to change and innovation. And I think their curiosity around learning new things is also pretty incredible, where they're looking at using AI tools in a way that a lot of our, at least my generation, is not accustomed to. And so that constant agility, I think, is incredible. I frankly would like to turn it over to you and say, well, how do you think about that for a school? Like, how do you think about what you're going to change and what your goals are for Penn or for Wharton?
So I think it's twofold. I think there are, people who lead academic institutions have a perspective, and they bring that perspective to the conversation, to decision makings. But our perspective is also influenced by the groups of people that are coming into us. And so every year we are exposed, at least at Wharton, to 2,000 new undergraduates and almost 2,000 MBA students who are of a different generation. And they have their own views on the way that they want to lead the world and what they expect from higher education, from their academic institutions.
So do we have to change the skills that are being taught? Like, think about the AI major that was just launched, machine learning, all of these dynamics. How are you managing what students study at Penn, at Wharton?
So we have to pay attention to what we're hearing from the recruiters and from those students themselves who are thinking about their own startup initiatives. And so what it's going to take for them to be able to go out and be successful in today's environment, we have to build that into the curriculum. And if we're not doing our jobs of preparing young people. I have been fortunate over the years to sit on a couple of boards, and I hear the conversations in those boardrooms where they're talking about the talent pipeline and they're talking about the changes. And it's funny that you talk about New York versus California. The New York culture is still a bit more resistant and conservative when it comes to something like AI. And they're talking about in 5 to 10 years if we're going to change our hiring practices because we need different skill sets. And in California, those boards are saying we need to not even have higher education. We heard that last night.
I did think that was pretty hilarious.
So there are geographic differences, but who you surround yourself with and the people that you're exposing yourself to will inform the kind of direction that we need to be taking in higher ed.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by your own trajectory. I would describe you as an incredible girl boss. In an environment where there are not a lot of women who have done what you've been able to do. Talk us through how you've navigated through those waters in an entrepreneurial, technology, finance.
Yeah, when I was at Wharton, I graduated in '92. I was one of the few women in my class, and unfortunately, in some majors, I still think that's true. My eldest daughter goes to Penn, and she's getting her master's in robotics at Penn. And so I see that. And unfortunately, what worries me is in AI dynamics around data sources and people who work in those environments, if you bias in one direction, what that might lead to in such substantive fields as AI. And so I do hope that events like this and last night will inspire everybody to look at AI as a career choice, not just a small, narrow demographic group. For my own career, I think Wharton taught me resilience. I made a comment last night that Wharton really was the backbone of my career and changed my life. And I will forever be grateful to Wharton for changing everything about my life and the direction my career took. I would never be here without it. And I took a philosophy that I was just going to put my head down and do good work. And so that's the way I managed my career. And where I had myself in situations that were not supportive of who I was as a person, I just got myself out. But I never took myself out of the game before I needed to, meaning I didn't say, well, what if that happens? Maybe I shouldn't do this. I just powered through and did the work. And I'm lucky to have put myself in amazing companies and amazing situations. And I have amazing mentors who've been incredible to me. Vinod is one of them. And Vinod has been so tough on me. And that toughness in asking really good questions just has made me better. And even, I raised money for my company, Lead Bank. And the only reason why I raised money, I went and bought a bank a few years ago in order to build a fintech after leaving Square.
Girl boss.
Thank you. Who buys a bank? But I brought in outside investors only because I wanted the discipline of external participants to challenge my thinking. I think that's very first principles thinking strategy, to want to only question your own thinking and make it better. I actually think you're doing that on the Wharton board right now. And I'm curious, the dynamic of the last few years has been kind of brutal. And Penn, I think, is faring much better than many universities. Like, how do you think about managing the board and the constituents that you have at Wharton?
At the end of the day, the one thing that I have learned to be true about any person connected to Wharton is the deep love and passion they have for that school.
Yeah.
And so whatever I am experiencing from them is rooted in a place of love for the school. And if I take that as my starting point, then I can find a way to try to navigate around what they're looking for. Even when there might be deep disagreement in the strategies or the approaches, I know that at the core, there's this desire to ensure that Wharton and Penn is operating at the highest level. So I think that has been the one central theme that has been helpful to me as a leader in some turbulent times, navigate to a place where we can try to satisfy the needs of the most important stakeholders.
Yeah, I think, how will you think about first principles thinking and thinking about education? Like, last night was pretty provocative.
You think?
And it was amazing and provocative. But when you think about what higher education means, like, where do you want to go with that conversation? And is Wharton able to really think about first principles? Like, what should education and curriculum look like?
So I think there's probably no better business school to think about first principles with respect to education, largely because we were the world's first business school. So we invented the category, quite frankly. And if that is your legacy, you have no choice but then to determine what is next. And we're at, as I said in my opening remarks, we're really at an inflection point where all of education is changing, but I think in particular business schools and business education, because we sit at the nexus of a practical approach to problem solving, and we are still part of an academic institution. We are fundamentally researchers, and I think that skill set will allow us to identify the new strategies and the new goals that we should be achieving. So it feels a little uncomfortable right now because so many things are changing so quickly and all at once. But I have no doubt that if there's any school or any university that's going to be able to navigate through this and determine what the future of education looks like, it's going to happen at Wharton.
I'm curious, because your background is around crisis management. Do you use that framework of thinking for dealing with disruption like AI?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was having a conversation with some folks at dinner last night, and the key lesson for me is something that you said a few minutes ago, Jackie. The tendency when you are feeling threatened or under pressure is to narrow your circle of influence, to narrow the people with whom you are engaging and getting information. And we need to fight that tendency and do exactly the opposite. That's the moment when we need to bring in more people, more ideas, more influences, more perspectives, because that then changes the landscape for where the problem solutions will come from. If you narrow everything, you're going to have a very narrow set of options, and we need to increase optionality and flexibility, not decrease it.
Yeah, that's a really cool way of thinking about it. I mean, I have applied it in my own life in the sense of like going out and finding investors so that they could make my thinking better. But I do think that's interesting in a world where everything in your business can be deeply disrupted right now. So what do you do in order to change the trajectory of how you operate? It's a pretty scary but fascinating and amazing time.
So you mentioned you bought a bank, and you're listed on the CNBC disruptor list. So you are one of those companies that is disrupting the banking industry.
Yep.
But you too will likely be disrupted, and maybe in a shorter period of time than you imagine. So how are you preparing for what's next?
Yeah, I have to say it's really interesting to be on the Wharton board with, I describe them as the overlords of finance. It's pretty incredible to be in that environment because I started at Goldman Sachs, which is the stereotypical Wharton path of trajectory out of the school. And now I sit on the side of disruption, where I sometimes sit and listen to my colleagues who I consider to be infinitely smarter than I am. And I think like, oh my God, I'm going to totally kill your business. And so I do enjoy that. And then I also enjoy, I, I do also enjoy thinking that the San Francisco product mindset is so different than other mindsets around even the idea of like moving money or how Wall Street and other financial systems have worked. And I'm sitting here trying to reframe how the financial system could be wired. And so, my company builds infrastructure to power financial services without you really knowing it. We're embedded financial services. And so you will, as a consumer, you really don't know that we exist because we sit underneath the first layer of financial infrastructure. And every day I sit and think about like, why is it that settlement takes 2 days? Why is it that, XYZ happens in the financial system when trades settle, when money moves in the banking system, or the way you send wires internationally. There are so many things about the way we're just so accustomed to the financial system working. It's one of the biggest industries in the world, and obviously such a big system and support system for Wharton, given the alumni base. But it's fascinating to start and rethink something at such a mass scale. And one of the interesting dynamics I find around financial services is that most of the market cap is over 50 years old, because in some ways, the embedded systems are part of the moat, the regulatory moat that's existed. And so I do think it'll be an incredibly disruptive environment to bring technology to financial services, because it's also one of those things you can't get wrong. Like, you can't have a model hallucinate and move money to the wrong person by accident. You've got to get it right. There's no tolerance for error. And so I think it's an interesting place to be, and an interesting intersection of a Wharton career where you have to use technology to just transform the way financial services operates. So it's a really cool place to be.
So one of the things that I experience is a frustration when it feels like things are taking too long, or there are so many hurdles that you don't necessarily anticipate. And I have to imagine, given what you're describing you're doing at LEAD, you find a number of hurdles. And how do you handle the frustration when you're not able to move, or your company isn't able to move as quickly as you are thinking about it in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to first principles thinking, and it really makes a difference, because in a world where you're creating new products, even if those products sound very banal and old, you can't ever have anyone in your company say, oh, well, that's the way I did it here. And if anybody starts with that mentality, they'll never be able to work in an innovative company. And it doesn't matter whether it's a function like HR or internal audit, or these things you take as like, well, that's a systematic process that has to be defined. Like, everyone should be redefining the work in every function of their job. One of the functions I ran when I was at Square was HR. And HR people are notoriously not focused on like, what's an HR strategy? But even in a function like that, you could deploy PhDs to look at how people systems move and use machine learning to analyze people. You can look at, why do you do things? And it could be something even like, what benefits do we give people? And so they're functions that people have used as like non-analytical, non-innovative functions. But I use it as a great example of where first principles thinking should drive everything you do. And then I also think ruthless prioritization really makes a difference in how you go about your work. And it's really interesting to analyze your own calendar and look at how you allocate your own time, because that in and of itself is a very good tell about what's important to you. And I think if you're not analyzing your own calendar and ruthlessly prioritizing everything, you're not allocating your time, which is like the most important thing we all have, to the things that matter the most.
We have just a minute left, and you mentioned Square. And We were talking earlier, Jackie, and you, you said, and I hope I'm not going to reveal anything that you don't want revealed. You had mentioned that when you were hired at Square, Vinod said that you were the absolutely wrong hire because you had no background in engineering.
Yeah, he called me like the biggest mistake of their executive team. Yes.
So how did
Yes.
you overcome that? How did you demonstrate your worth and add value in an environment that looked for and prioritized an engineering mindset?
Yes, well, thankfully, there are many times when he's wrong. And, one of the things I find about people who are absolutely brilliant is that they're brilliant in like 10% of the things they do, but those 10% are just so wildly high of a spike that it masks the other 90% where, you never quite know. And so, he considered me a mistake in the job that I took, which was building a lending business because he wanted a machine learning data scientist in that job. And he wasn't wrong. But at the same time, I was able to go and learn the business and then make sure that I covered my blind spots. And that's one of the best things I've done. I've never considered myself that smart, but I consider myself someone who works harder than most. And I'm really comfortable with my own vulnerabilities and covering the things that I'm not good at. I know I'm not an engineer, and I think the engineering culture is so important to innovation and being a builder. And I think now with AI, there are so many different ways to cover up for that kind of blind spot that I can employ my Wharton background, which to me is a background of curiosity. And I'm able to deploy that background and know that I've got to just hire someone who's better than me in that function. And I have.
And not be intimidated by that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Jackie, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Have a good day, everyone.